You wake on a floor that isn't yours, to a body that won't be again. The room smells like iron and old cloth. Your mouth is sand. Your future is a locked smile someone else paid for. Forget silk and power. This is blood, fever, and obedience. Tonight I'll take you through 4 anchors of this life. The cut and its aftermath. The court you can't quit. The medical grind that never ends, and how it actually ends. We'll move through Byzantium, the Islamicate courts, and Imperial China. Same trap, different walls. Stay, there's a secret step that kept you useful and sick. But before we start, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button if you enjoy the content. Also, leave a comment on what topics you'd like for me to cover next. Now let's begin. So, before you get comfortable, you need to understand the price of admission. In every empire that used eunuchs, the logic was the same. Close the door to sex and succession, and you create a body that can cross thresholds others can't. Harems, treasuries, bedchambers, sacred rooms. Access is the commodity. Your body is the key because it can't threaten a bloodline. Let's be clear, this isn't a single culture's quirk. In Byzantium, you're part of a palace machine obsessed with purity and proximity. In Abbasid or Ottoman spaces, you're a gate through which the ruler's household breathes. In Ming and Qing China, you're the inner court instrument. Paper, seals, whispers, different uniforms, same job. You're trusted furniture. How do you get here? You rarely choose it. You're an enslaved boy bought in a market at the right height and quietness, or a war captive. Sometimes a criminal sentenced to a clean punishment that bleeds forever. Sometimes your family sells you because hunger argues louder than love. Brokers, surgeons, handlers, clerks. There's a whole economy around your transformation. Your skin pays everyone's rent. Myth bust. Not every eunuch becomes a minister. Most become servants with titles that sound important until you see the bedroll. The famous kingmaker is the headline case. Most are ink smudges that never dry. Now the methods. They vary, and every version hurts. Partial removal, testes only, means one set of changes. Full removal, penis and testes, means another. The tools aren't kind. Blades that have cut more than wood, clamps to crush vessels, cautery to seal what should be closed by skill instead of fire. If you're lucky, someone splashes alcohol. If you're luckier, there's wine or opium. Usually there's water if the handler remembers. Timing is strategic cruelty. Pre-puberty cuts reroute your whole growth, softer features, higher voice, altered bones. Post-puberty cuts leave you broad-shouldered but hollowed, suited for guard work and heavy labour. The decision isn't yours, it's logistics. Mortality? A coin toss. Bleeding that won't stop. Infection that hums beneath a fever and then screams. Shock that empties you from the inside out. Surgeons brag about survival rates because they must. You don't get to brag. Immediate consequences are brutal and boring at the same time. Pain that crowds your thoughts. Thirst you can't satisfy because drinking too fast swells what needs to drain. Urine that won't come. A bladder that feels like it might burst. Cloth sticking where the body wants breath. Fever dreams you can't remember. Stink you can't ignore. You learn infection by scent. Sweet, then rotten, then metal again. That's bad. Across empires, the promise is identical. If you survive, you will be trusted. Trusted to guard what isn't yours. Trusted to carry messages you can't repeat. Trusted to take the blame. The trust is a leash. Let's pause for a quiet truth. The system needs you broken. Not dead, not whole. Broken in the exact way that keeps you useful and stops you reproducing. The outsider-insider paradox is the point. You belong everywhere and nowhere. In Byzantium, priests argue about spiritual purity while a steward checks if you can walk without bleeding. In an Ottoman palace, scribes note your new name and assign a rank. A black eunuch here, a white eunuch there. Different corridors, different ceilings. In the Forbidden City, you're registered, inspected, assigned to a bureau where paper will cut you slower than knives. The walls change colour, the rules don't. Another myth bust. Literacy isn't guaranteed. Some courts train you because paperwork needs hands that won't found dynasties. Others keep you ignorant because questions are expensive. Education is a privilege, not a cure. The silent economy hums. Brokers take a cut, surgeons take a fee, court officials skim in the name of order. Your body is margin. Even your recovery generates revenue. Herbs, cloth, oil, prayers. Everyone has a role, everyone gets paid, except you, not yet. And here's the secret step I promised. Deliberate dehydration after the cut to slow urine and reduce pressure on the wound. It makes you weak, dizzy, and fragile. Perfectly compliant. Useful and sick by design. You don't enter power. You limp toward a gate that might not open. If it does, you step into rooms that feel colder than outside, because proximity without belonging is a draft that never stops. Your new life begins with a simple, quiet order. Stand there. Don't speak. Don't bleed on the carpet. Now you're on the mat. It's rush hour for flies. Hands pin your shoulders and knees, not cruel, just practiced. Timing matters. They want you young, so the voice stays high and the bones grow strange, or they want you later, broad and useful for doors and heavy things. You're a timetable, not a person. Someone warms a blade over coals. Someone else mutters about fate like that helps with steel. Heat first, cloth next, then the quiet before the scream. They restrain the hips because people kick when veins open. A cord bites your thighs. A hand locks your chin so you don't crack teeth on wood. If there's wine, it arrives in a chipped cup you can't lift twice. If there's opium, it's a whisper on the tongue. Sweet lies that last minutes, not mercy. Mostly it's breath, smoke, and the heavy patience of men who do this for coin. The cut isn't a single thing. It's a sequence. Pressure, slice, wet warmth that feels wrong, then heat again. A clamp chews vessel. Cautery screams for you when you can't. Skin curls under flame, and someone says, "Good," because bleeding slows. You want to kick. The cord doesn't let you. Air smells like iron soup, old sweat, and ash. Your body is a bonfire that doesn't throw light. Then the work that decides if you live. A reed or slender tube hunts for a path so you can pass water later. They don't call it a catheter. They call it hope. If the tube won't seat, panic grows like mold. The wound learns to seal too fast. You learn to pray fast enough to keep up. Ash rubbed in. Herbs pressed on. Thread passed through flesh that wasn't asked for permission. Recovery begins with orders you can barely hear. Don't drink. Or drink a mouthful and wait. Dehydrate the stream so pressure stays low. It makes sense and feels like punishment. Your tongue dries, your lips crack, your thoughts turn to ceilings in the shape of shadow. Your bladder fills anyway. It always does. You brace for it like bad weather. Night is fever arithmetic. You count the beats between cramps. You measure your life by drops. When urine finally threads through the tube, it burns like a map of every nerve you own. Relief is not relief. It's an argument you win by inches. If it stops, fear presses like a hand on your chest. If it doesn't stop, you bleed into the straw and listen for someone's footsteps. You hope are kind. Now here's where most people mess up. They seal the wound neat, like sewing a purse, proud of their tidy work. Neat traps pus. Neat makes a pocket where rot sings. You need drainage, ugly and open enough to weep. The thing most people miss is that cleanliness isn't a word here. It's moving air, change cloth, flies brushed away, water that isn't shared with a bucket of feet. You learn infection by scent. Sweet means sugar in the blood you don't have. Foul means things growing that shouldn't. Iron means you're still here. You shift just enough to stop clots. You don't jump when a stitch tugs because tearing now writes your name on a slab. You weigh flies with a bundle of reeds. You curse them softly when the room's empty and softly when it isn't, because loud belongs to people with options. A boy across the room shivers into silence and doesn't wake. No one says his name twice. The mat gets rolled. That's the policy. The fever talks to you in languages you don't know. You answer in sweat. Someone wipes your face with a cloth that used to be white. Someone counts your breaths and decides you're worth another cup of broth. Salt, warm grain, a smear of oil. Fuel for a body that's relearning itself against its will. If you're lucky, an old eunuch stops by, checks the reed, nods at the colour, tells you not to scratch. He speaks like a man who survived by shutting doors inside his head. Days blur into a drill. Morning, lift, breathe, sip, wait. Noon, check the bandage, change if it's heavy, fear the moment when air hits and the pain spikes. Evening, sits in warm water if you have a basin. If not, a rag will try to be a river. Night, again. Listen for the first hiss of stream. Thank any god still taking calls. The reason this works is simple. Pressure breaks stitches. Stillness breeds clots. Balance is boring. Boring keeps you alive. Mistakes lurk in kindness. A visitor brings strong wine. It dries you until your kidneys knock like fists. A handler tightens the binding to stop a leak. The skin dies under the knot. A miracle tonic promises vigor and steals water you don't have. The game changer nobody talks about is patience measured in sips and steps. 10 steps today, 12 tomorrow. Not because you're brave, because lying there is worse. Then one morning you stand without seeing stars. The reed comes out like a bad rumour. The stream is thin but steady. You don't trust it. Good. Distrust is survival. You breathe against the pain and reach for clothes that scratch in places still learning foreign borders. You smell like antiseptic that isn't, herbs that almost help, and a body that remembers a line was crossed. Congratulations. You're alive enough to serve. The world doesn't clap. It hands you a list and tells you not to bleed on it. Before we continue, you need to understand the quiet part, the part that never stops. Your body doesn't accept a memo and move on. It rewrites itself slowly, stubbornly, in letters you feel more than read. Hormones shift the furniture. Fat slides from where you work to put it to where cloth rubs it raw. Your face softens at the edges. Hair thins on your arms, grows lazy everywhere else. Muscle forgets it used to answer fast. You reach for a jar and the lift feels like a question instead of a fact. Some of you grow tall, joints unsure of the blueprint. Others stay compact, bones dense in odd places, fragile in others. The blueprint wasn't drawn for you, the builder didn't leave notes. Cold finds you first. Rooms others call pleasant feel like cellars. You learn to hunt sunbeams across a floor like a cat. Except you don't get to curl up and nap there. You keep moving because that's the job, even while your fingers ache and your teeth hum a little in winter. Heat isn't kinder. Rashes bloom where fabric traps sweat in new folds. Linen scrapes. Silk, when it appears, lies and slides. Looks fine and feels like being hugged by a wet leaf. Wounds argue with time. Cuts knit slow. Bruises stay like ink stains. A sandal rubs your heel, and you're buttering ointment on it for a week, checking the skin like it's a ledger with red numbers. If you forget one night, the sore reminds you by morning. The thing most people miss is that healing here is logistics. Air, clean cloth, warmth. Not magic, just relentless maintenance. Skip one, pay later. Desire is a whole separate math problem. It doesn't vanish, it goes sideways. Sometimes it's absent, a room you never enter. Sometimes it shows up like a misaddressed letter, feeling without outlet, heat without map. You learn to sit with it until it cools. You learn not to flinch when someone assumes you don't feel at all. The good news is that people underestimate you. The bad news is they also feel entitled to you. Keep that in your pocket. It explains later ugliness. Food becomes medicine, whether you want it to or not. Salt matters. Broth matters. Warm grains smooth the mornings when your gut sulks. Too much fluid too fast turns your bladder into an enemy. You practice sips, not gulps, a discipline you didn't ask for but can't refuse. You learn which herbs calm the churn and which ones only make the latrine acquainted with your face. Ginger helps. Heavy wine does not, no matter what a generous guard insists. Clothes become tools. You pick seams that don't bite, belts you can loosen without ceremony, shoes that forgive swelling at noon and still hold your foot at night. Layering is strategy, not style. A thin undercloth to drink sweat so the outer doesn't chafe you raw. A soft wrap to keep your lower belly warm because cold there means longer bathroom prayers. Laundry is survival. Stale cloth rubs you into the clinic you can't afford. Mood isn't spared. Hormone shifts sand the edges off certain tempers and sharpen others. You tire faster around loud people. You crave steadiness, so you create it where you can. Tidy lists, quiet corners, the same route between rooms where your feet know the nails that stick up. You count heartbeats when panic's shadow crosses the wall. You carry prayer beads not because you're devout, maybe you are, maybe not, but because the rhythm keeps your breath from fraying. Now here's where most people mess up. They assume your body is stable once the wound closes. It isn't. It's a machine with new parts and no manual. Stand too long and your ankles gossip. Sit too long and your back files a complaint. Eat rich for 2 nights because a kitchen likes you, and your joints tell you that favour costs more than it paid. Balance is boring. Boring is good. The reason this works is you adapt like a clerk solving a late-night column error. Slow, precise, annoyed, and effective. You map your day to your body's tides. You warm your hands before delicate work. You schedule your sips round bells. You keep a cloth folded just so in your sleeve for the moment you feel a seam start to burn. You become a caretaker of a house you can't ever move out of. You didn't ask for this renovation. You live in it anyway. And tomorrow, you'll wake to the same quiet negotiations. Skin and cloth, thirst and duty, heat and cold. And you'll make it all look effortless for people who never notice effort unless it fails. Now comes the part that gnaws, quiet and patient. The bladder, the tubes, the burn that writes your days. The wound closed, but the plumbing didn't forget. Scar tissue is petty. It narrows paths, builds strictures like toll gates. You stand over a bowl at dawn, the palace waking behind you, and wait. The stream hesitates. Your body bargains. Someone knocks, and your bladder chooses pride over speed. Dribble, stop, ache. The morning begins with apology. Strictures don't announce themselves, they creep. One winter you notice it takes a little longer. By spring you're timing yourself to bells. At night you wake 3 times, then 4, then every hour on the half. Sleep phrase, mood follows. You learn to lean forward, to press 2 fingers just above the bone to coax flow, to breathe like you're lifting a jar. Some days it's a thin hiss, others, nothing. Your shoulders curl around the effort as if shame were a weather you could block with your back. Common mistake, forcing. Pushing hard is a gamble you lose in blood and dizziness. The reason this works differently now is simple. The scar behaves like a stubborn door. You don't kick stubborn doors. You grease hinges, warm cloth, slow breaths, a cup of salted broth 15 minutes earlier than you want it. You become a clerk of liquids, filing every sip so it appears on schedule. And then stones, little knives with patience. They start as grit, grow into gravel, dream of boulders. You know the day one moves. The pain doesn't ask permission. It seizes your middle from spine to groin and twists like someone wringing a wet rag. You freeze mid-corridor, tray in hand, and smile at a courtier who shouldn't see you sweat. Later, doubled over in a latrine that smells like old wars, you hear the pebble ping the basin and want to cry from victory and exhaustion. You want a rock. Tomorrow its cousin will apply for the job. Herbal diuretics help sometimes. Parsley, fennel, a tea that tastes like lawn clippings and obstinacy. They make you pee more, which you needed, but they also thin your reserves until your head feels like a hollow gourd on a stick. Dehydration is a familiar enemy in polite clothing. You sip, you wait, you curse plants, you thank them, you curse them again. Balance is tedious. Tedious is survival. Infections patrol the border between annoying and danger. You learn the smell test because you have to. Sweet, like bad fruit. Worry. Foul, swamp thick. Heat water, clean everything. Tell someone you trust in case you don't wake at noon. Sharp iron, a little copper penny taste in the air. That's blood. Don't panic unless it's a river. You don't have a lab. You have a nose, a pulse, an experience earned the hard way. Local healers argue. One swears by poultices, mashes of herbs and hope, warm against tender skin. Another loves purges. Purge the bile, purge the phlegm, purge whatever the theory blames this year. Purging steals strength you'll beg for later. Poultices soothe, sometimes trap heat. You pick and choose. Sit in a basin of warm water, salted just enough to sting but not scald. Pour diluted alcohol, wine or spirits cut with boiled water, over cloth and dab, not scrub. Scrubbing punishes skin that's already doing its best. Cathetering, if you can find a reed or a silver tube that isn't a lie, is precision work. Too wide and you tear. Too rough, and you invite an infection with excellent manners and terrible intentions. You lube with oil warmed in your palm, breathe steady, follow the path like tracing ink lines in bad light. If you fail once, you wait and try later. Panic makes hands cruel. Cruelty is expensive. The palace doesn't pause for your plumbing. Absence is suspicious. Lateness is gossip. So you plan your relief like a thief plans routes. You memorize which courtyards have quiet corners, which stair landings hide a bucket, which clerk won't ask questions if you hover near his door for 5 minutes looking like you're studying a crack in the floor. You tuck extra cloth in your sleeve and change it with the speed of a card trick. Shame recedes when practice takes over. You are not dirty. You are under siege. Long-term the risks circle like dogs. Kidney strain from years of backflow and bargaining. Fevers that start as a chill and spike into nonsense. Words melting in your mouth while your skin burns without candles. Sepsis isn't a word you know. It's a feeling like sinking through a bed while people talk from far away. The line between ache and danger is thin, So you keep a ledger. Pain here, colour there, smell today versus yesterday. If it shifts toward the wrong column, you ask for help early. Asking is hard. Dying is harder. I'll give you a small win. Sitz baths at night, a handspan of warm water, a pinch of salt, 5 steady minutes. Diluted washes after long days, especially in summer. Sip salted lightly when fever whispers, not gulps when it screams. Ginger for the gut, skip the heavy wine, and this, walk. Slow, unheroic, daily. Movement keeps clots from building castles where you need roads. You didn't choose this maintenance, you perform it anyway. And tomorrow you show up at dawn because not showing up is louder than any complaint your body can make. The palace rewards silence. Your body punishes it. You learn to speak just enough, with water, with warmth, with small stubborn rituals that keep you on your feet. Myth bust 2. Sexless means safe? No. So, before you get comfortable with the idea that desire turned off means danger turned down, let's break that. Sexless on paper doesn't make you safe in rooms where power eats rules for breakfast. You're still a body. You're still available. Predators love loopholes, and you are the palace's biggest one. You're not immune to harassment. You're convenient. Hands that wouldn't risk scandal with a courtier feel brave with you, because the gossip slides off differently. You learn to deflect with humour, to slide sideways in a corridor, to carry trays like shields. Sometimes it works. Sometimes the shield is treated like permission. Some eunuchs are forced into sexual labour, especially where proximity becomes its own permission slip. Your status is used as a technicality, safe for the harem, pure for the bedchamber, turned into access you can't refuse. That word, safe, keeps getting used in sentences where you get smaller. Desire doesn't vanish. Biology shifts. Humanity doesn't. Maybe you feel nothing for months, then everything at once when a voice hits some hidden wire. Maybe touch is a ghost that walks through you, or a spark that finds wet tinder. You handle it like every other problem, quietly, carefully, without witnesses. The palace likes to pretend you're an appliance. Appliances don't need boundaries. People do. Scandal logic is simple and cruel. If anything goes wrong, blame the eunuch. A letter delivered late becomes, you lingered. A glance becomes, you tempted. You weren't designed to be a target, but systems don't care about design. They care about plausible relief valves for rage. You're it. The thing most people miss is that sexlessness is a status about others' heirs, not your dignity. They removed your threat to dynasties, not to abusers. So you learn soft refusals, safer routes, allies with keys, rooms with 2 doors. You trade small favours for buffer space. You volunteer for errands that keep you in public sight. You survive by managing other people's appetites like schedules. Sexless means safe? No. Sexless means the danger wears different clothes. Cross-court tour, Byzantium, Islamic courts, China. Let's walk the corridors, because the walls change but the draft feels the same. Byzantium first. You're in Constantinople's great palace, a bureaucracy that purrs when oiled and bites when ignored. The air smells of incense over old stone. You're a cubicularios, chamber functionary, a hinge in the emperor's private suite. Sacred proximity is your job description. You pace mosaicked floors, counting steps so you reach the veil at exactly the right moment. Clergy hover, eyes sharp for impropriety, and still you're closer to the emperor's pillow than they'll ever be. That closeness breeds rivals. A bishop's frown can become your pay docked. A patrician's rumour can become an inquiry with teeth. Byzantium trains some of you. Literacy is useful when policy runs on parchment. You learn to hold a stylus, to keep your ink from blotting when a general barges in shouting about borders. But training doesn't mean safety. The palace is a theatre where everyone reads omens into how you handed a towel. Hand it wrong during Lent? Someone calls it sacrilege. Hand it right to the wrong cousin? Someone calls it conspiracy. Your best trick is turning into a wall that remembers. Slide east and south to Abbasid Baghdad, Cairo under the Mamluks, then Istanbul under the Ottomans. The palaces breathe households. Harem access defines you. You enter spaces where men with beards can't. That access is currency and target. Stratification marks the halls. Black eunuchs often oversee the imperial harem in certain periods. White eunuchs gatekeep outer apartments, schools, and pages. Roles vary by century and ruler, but the hierarchy is carved into doors and faces. The courtyard heat bakes clay sweet and bitter. You smell rosewater over sweat, pastry over politics. You carry messages between women whose words decide marriages, alliances, and whether a prince eats alone. Your body says non-threat, your memory says weapon, your mouth says nothing. The chief of your corps, if you rise that high, navigates a storm of viziers, agers, aghast whispers. He has quarters, a seal, a staff. He also has a bullseye painted on his back so bright it shines at night. Harem proximity teaches you a new blade, listening without collecting. You learn not to remember details that could be mined later. Your protection is competence wrapped in ignorance. Do the thing flawlessly. Know nothing of why. The good news is the kitchens adore a servant who doesn't gossip. The bad news is one kitchen rumour can still place you in a room you merely passed. Now ride the trade winds of rumour to Ming, then Qing, Beijing. The Forbidden City is a city the size of a philosophy. Red lacquer, yellow tiles, courtyards like lungs inhaling and exhaling processions. You're registered, inspected, placed. The Directorate of Ceremonies, the Palace Bureau of Eunuchs, the Department of Household Provisioning. Names vary across centuries. The drill doesn't. You stamp documents that tell grain where to go. You inventory jade you'll never touch bare-handed. You handle seals that could end careers if you drop them a finger's width. Here, literacy can elevate dangerously. Some eunuchs rise literate and lethal in paperwork, mediating between inner and outer courts. Others remain illiterate labour, sweeping, hauling, freezing. Punishments are codified and creative. A misplaced seal means flogging. Theft can mean more. Palace law doesn't need to prove beyond doubt. It needs to restore order. You live with that in your throat like a stone. China also teaches the long bureaucracy. You climb by patronage and exams crafted for your lane. The exams don't make you scholar officials. They make you accurate cogs. A wrong stroke in a character can be a month of latrine duty. A right stroke in the wrong petition can be suspicion. You learn to make your handwriting excellent and your ambitions invisible. Across all three, the common thread is cruelly simple. Closeness to the centre, distance from belonging. You're allowed into spaces others call sacred or forbidden, but you're not of those spaces. You are their janitor, their switchboard, their night watch. Your name is known until it's inconvenient, then it's forgotten or unspoken on purpose. Variation in method marked how you began. Byzantium often cut early for voice and malleability. Islamic at courts drew from markets, war, law, methods and ages mixed with role. The Ottomans distinguished corps with different origins and surgeries. Ming and Qing drew boys from poverty, crime, or desperate families. Procedures varied from partial to total, with survival a metric nobody wrote in marble. Distinct training paths shaped your hands, not your rights. The currency stays the same. Obedience, memory, silence. You spend it daily, sometimes hourly. When you climb, the ladder is there, the air thins and gets colder. A stipend arrives, silk appears, rooms get doors that lock. The price rises with the floor. You smile more, you sleep less. The fall is steeper. Feeling thirsty, need to freshen up. Too bad, you're on duty. The bell rings, the door opens. Across empires the line is identical. Stand there, don't speak, don't bleed on the carpet. The ladder, from broom to whispered orders. You start with a broom and a list that isn't yours. Promotion looks like a slightly heavier key. Patronage is the first real rung. You catch a steward's eye by solving a small disaster before it has a name, replacing a cracked ewer, finding a lost seal, calming a kitchen feud with the right 2 words. He asks your name. He remembers it twice. Congratulations, you've been noticed. The good news is you're now in orbit. The bad news is you inherit his enemies with the favour. Skills become currency. Logistics first. You keep 2 schedules in your head. The public one everyone quotes, and the private one that actually happens. You're on time to the fiction, early to the truth. Handwriting next. Your lines go straight, your characters clean, your columns tight enough to make a miser smile. People trust neat paper. They forget the hands behind it. That's the point. Your competence should glow just enough to light their path, not yours. Reading moods before mouths open is the graduate course. A minister's shoes dusted with road grit means urgency. A princess's rings chosen light means grief, not fashion. A guard humming is a warning, not music. You pivot before you're told. You rearrange chairs because you felt a fight coming. You swap a route because you smelled a trap in a corridor's silence. People call that luck. You call it survival with good ears. A patron pulls you closer. You carry his notes, then draft them. He teaches you his shorthand, a dot for delay, a curl for danger. You acquire a seal you keep in a pouch against your skin, proof you speak with someone else's mouth. It feels like power until the first time someone challenges it. Then you learn humility by the inch. You never say, I have authority. You say, he requests, and let the room decide how much that weighs. Your rewards arrive in measured upgrades. Silk stipends, cloth you don't wear often but can trade for coal, a winter cloak lined properly for once, a room that locks. You sleep better because the hinge isn't a rumour. You get a small chest for your own papers, a list of debts owed, a map of favours, 3 names who will open doors if you knock at midnight. Maybe, after years, a small house outside the walls, a place to stand in sunlight without counting footsteps behind you. The cost accrues with every step. Sleep debt comes standard. You lie down and replay the day like an audit. Did you hand the wrong cup? Did you miss the twitch at the corner of a count's mouth? Suspicion is the air now. It dries your throat. People who nodded at you last year watch you today like a candle near a tapestry. You start avoiding windows at night. You stop strolling. You don't eat anything sent without a name attached to the tray. The target on your back grows with your rank. Downfall scripts travel fast because they're easy to stage. Theft is simple. A ledger finds a gap. Sedition is cheaper. Your neat hand resembles the note. Witchcraft appears when someone needs a word that means, they scare me, and I can't prove why. You keep copies of everything in a second box within a box. You never keep both boxes in the same room. You memorize the contents in case both burn. Now here's the part that separates beginners from pros. You don't hoard credit. You spread it like sand to keep your footing. You let a jealous clerk believe the idea was his. You let a volatile captain think he made the call. You feed small wins to hungry egos so they don't bite yours. You protect juniors who will someday be asked where you were on a night that will matter. They'll say, busy saving me. It will be true because you planned it that way. You also learn to refuse cleverly. Never say no to a dangerous favour. Say yes to an equal favour that keeps you in public view. Accept errands that leave a trail. Decline intimate, windowless meetings by misplacing yourself 3 corridors away with witnesses who complain about your helpfulness. You weaponize visibility. You lean heavily on routine. Routine is a moat you can cross fast and others can't. Climbing feels like breathing thinner air. The view improves, the ledge narrows. You carry whispered orders now, not lists. You know the timing on a dismissal before the dismissed does. Your face stays still while you escort a man to a door that won't open for him again. You go home by a different route. You touch the seal in your pouch and remind yourself it's rented. Authority here is always a loan, never a deed. And if you're smart, you keep the broom. Not literally, but in your head. You remember floors, dust, the smell of soap. You visit the kitchens with news before anyone asks. You send coal to a clerk whose wife is sick. You keep a network like a net below you, so when, not if, you slip, you land bruised, not broken. The ladder doesn't love you. You climb anyway, one careful rung at a time, whispering orders you didn't write, praying you never have to read your own. Morning begins with negotiation, not with people, with joints, bladder, and breath. You wake before the bell because your bladder voted yes while the rest of you wanted 15 more minutes of not thinking. You sit up slow. Ankles creak, knees argue, lower back recites its complaints like liturgy. You wrap warm cloth around your lower belly, habit, not drama, because warmth buys you flow later. Breakfast is strategy. Warm broth, a little salt, soft grain, enough to wake the blood, not enough to bloat the gut that punishes optimism. Then the first appointment with porcelain or bucket. You lean, breathe, wait. Thin stream, a sting that sketches old maps. You don't push. You press 2 fingers just above bone, coax, count to 12, rest, count again. It's a ritual with no incense, only patience. Some mornings you win quickly, others you file a late report to your own kidneys and accept the reprimand. You dress with a field engineer's mind, linen underlayer to drink sweat, outer cloth chosen for seams that won't bite by noon, belt loose enough for a fast slip when you need to pee without wrestling knots. Extra cloth folded in your sleeve, flat and neat. Because leaks are logistics, not shame. Shoes that forgive swelling by midday. Your toolkit looks like clothing. It's armour you can launder. By mid-morning the feet swell from standing. It arrives like tide. Quiet, then everywhere. You shift weight in place, a dancer no one sees, heels and toes trading brief salvations. You schedule discreet breaks inside other people's errands, delivering a note past a latrine with a door that sticks, fetching a cup near a corridor cobbler won't visit today. If the stream hesitates, you breathe through the ache and tell yourself stories about rivers that never started with a flood. Lunch is light because heavy food punishes afternoon. Rice if you're east, bread heel if you're west, broth everywhere. Ginger when the gut sulks. You drink in sips a quarter hour before you'll need relief, not when thirst screams. The reason this works is boring and true. Your body obeys rhythms you can coax, not demands you shout. Everyone else rushes. You preheat outcomes. Afternoon brings the small humiliations you learn to strip of power. A trickle when you bend to lay a cushion. A cough that jolts a leak into your cloth. You step sideways, replace the liner in 3 practiced moves and carry on. The shame you thought you'd drown in years ago is now a puddle you step over without looking down. You refuse to give it a name. Names make things heavy. Evening, if kindness visits, includes a bath. Not luxury, maintenance. Warm water in a basin, a pinch of salt, a sit so the day's chafe can unknot. You sponge folds gently, dab rather than scrub, check the place's fabric tried to carve its initials. Oil the raw edges, sesame, olive, tallow, whatever the region hands you. You pat yourself dry and breathe in the brief mercy of skin that isn't arguing. You inventory damage like a meticulous clerk. Heel blister? Pad it. Rash beginning under belt line? Shift the knot, change the cloth, skip the wool tomorrow. Fingertip cut from a seal's edge. Clean it twice. Small wounds write large endings here. The trick is catching small things before they apply for promotions. Neglect is the manager you can't afford. Night is a maze with familiar monsters. You lie down and sleep arrives in segments. First watch. You drift, surface when your bladder taps your shoulder. You get up, curse softly, pad cold floors, negotiate with strictures, return, repeat. Second watch. A house noise snaps you awake, not because it's loud, but because fear trained your ears. You rehearse alibis for events that haven't happened. You count heartbeats until they stop racing horses in your chest. Fear of knocks is its own alarm. In courts where paper bites, night knocks rewrite careers. You learn to put your robe where your left hand finds it blind. You place your seal case within reach, but not visible from the door. You sleep with your body angled toward escape, a geometry of dread you no longer notice until someone sleeps beside you and asks why. You don't have an answer that isn't a ledger of old lessons. Coping looks small and feels large. Slow walks at dusk, the kind that don't attract questions. Counting beads when panic hums, not because beads are holy, but because numbers are. A short prayer you can say with lips closed while pretending to study a crack in the wall. You train your breath to follow 4s. In, hold, out, hold. You trade coffee for tea if the decade offers either. You treat quiet like medicine because it is. Mistakes to avoid become laws. Tight belts? Never. They look tidy and buy you pain by twilight. Chill drafts across the belly? Block them. A cold front there buys you midnight bargaining. Heavy wine? It promises sleep and delivers dehydration with a hangman's grin. Long rides without breaks? No. You schedule stops like taxis, inevitable, resented, necessary. People will scoff. People don't pay your bill at 3 a.m. Sometimes the day wins. You limp, you leak, you lie and say you're fine because telling the truth sounds like asking for permission to be human, and that permission isn't in the day's budget. But sometimes you win. A morning with no sting, an afternoon where you solved a problem before it sharpened teeth, an evening where the bathwater stayed warm just long enough and the oil smelled faintly of something like hope. You plan for a future you might not get by acting as if you will. You set aside a little coin for coal, you learn which apothecary waters down tinctures, you map benches and courtyards with shade at noon, you train a junior to fetch the right bucket without questions. You become the elder who nods at a boy fresh from fever and says, "Don't scratch." He will survive because you did. And in the quiet before sleep finally sticks, you remind yourself of the rule that kept you here. Boring is good. Boring is a schedule without emergencies. Boring is pain that fits into boxes you labelled and stacked. You make another list for tomorrow. You set the cloth by the bed, You lie down facing the door, you breathe like a metronome, you sleep until the bladder calls you to work again. So, before someone comments, "But some eunuchs got rich," let's lance that illusion carefully. Some did, most didn't. Wages exist, but the palace is a maze of deductions with good penmanship. Uniform fees, lamp oil, fines for lateness, voluntary donations. Your coin walks out the same door it entered, just wearing different hats. Wealth, when it appears, arrives as stipends, gifts, and side favours. A silk allotment you can resell, a cut from managing a storeroom without losing your integrity. You stack small gains like bricks, quiet and square. Then one rumour about missing grain, one audit discovering a discrepancy, and your bricks become someone else's patio. The bad news isn't that money is rare, it's that money paints a target. Adoption, it happens, sometimes softly, sometimes a ceremony. You take in a boy from a cousin's failing stall, a clerk's son whose father drank his prospects flat. You teach him schedules, ink, how to read faces the way sailors read weather. You call him son, he calls you father. It warms a room the palace keeps cold, but inheritance is a game with rules written by people who don't want your line to continue. Papers can be questioned, assets can be reassigned. Your boy learns early that love and property don't always attend the same meetings. Freedom wears paperwork like perfume. Manumission exists in ledgers, on seals, in evenings where you dare a smile. But in practice, your patron decides when that paper breathes. A free eunuch without a patron is a loose tool in a chest that hates rattling. Jobs are still inside the system. Keys you thought were yours turn out to open doors only as long as someone powerful nods. Even when the seal looks official, community acceptance outside the walls is rationed. Neighbourhoods know what you are. Markets watch you count coins like you stole counting itself. Marriage is off the table. Companionship is negotiated in shadows. You come home with papers and discover that paper doesn't make you belong. It makes you explain. Mythbus nested inside this. The small houses some of you buy, they can be seized during purges, reallocated to a cousin of a minister who never met you. A will helps until a seal higher than yours says it doesn't. Freedom is a door that opens to a corridor, not a street. So yes, exceptions shine. A chief here, a director there, estates, servants, poems praising their efficiency. But don't mistake the bright lamp for daylight. Most lives stay in dim corners, pay just enough to persist, never enough to choose. Wealth is rare, adoption is fragile, and freedom is a script that requires the audience to clap on cue. The palace writes the cues, and yet you don't live alone in a void. You learn to find the edges where warmth gathers. Dormitories first, long rooms, shared trunks, beds that creak in familiar rhythm. At night, jokes fly just above a whisper, the kind that only you can tell because only you survived the punchlines. Barracks food tastes better when someone smuggles spice from a kind cook. A bad day softens when an older hand nudges a bowl closer without comment. Over time, circles form. Guild is too formal. Brotherhood is closer. Not by blood, by weathering. The elders, the ones with steady hands and readable eyes, carry soft power. They sit at the end of a table and ask how your stream is, which sounds crude until you realise it's love disguised as triage. They know which apothecary waters tinctures, which handler tightens bandages too tight, which steward mistakes neatness for healing. Their advice saves lives in increments, looser knots, warmer cloth, shorter shifts after fever. Some cities build houses, charity homes, retirement nests, halfway spaces owned by a religious foundation, or a wealthy patron soothed by mercy's good name. You buy a bed there with years of service, not coin alone. The rooms are small, the windows stingy, the rules exacting. No guests after bells, no private cooking, prayer at certain hours whether you like the words or not. But the sheets are cleaned, the buckets are emptied by someone who won't flinch at what they see. When fever knocks, a neighbour answers without asking for reasons. Ritual grows where rules leave gaps. Shared meals on certain days, simple rice, stewed greens, bread torn by hands that shake less in company. You trade herb packets like talismans. Ginger for nights, fennel for days, parsley only when you can rest. You mark the anniversaries nobody else does. The day your fever broke, the day your reed came out, the night you were sent home with a key and not a warning. You light a small lamp for the boy who didn't make it last winter, and for the one who ran and somehow wasn't dragged back. grief becomes a story you can tell without being accused of sentimentality. Money travels in quiet ways. A coin slid under a bowl for a junior who's been assigned too many night watches. A coal delivery miscounted toward an elder's room in January. A debt ledger that exists only in 3 memories, balanced by favours, not numbers. Mutual aid works because everyone knows what the night feels like when you're alone with a bucket and a fever. Outsiders call it clannish. You call it not dying. Politics exist even here. Pecking orders, petty turf over who gets the warm corner, who keeps the key to the linen chest, who speaks at the annual visit from the patron. But the fights rarely draw blood because everyone understands the real enemy is outside, not across the table. The elder who pushes too hard gets a plate of food anyway. The junior who shows off learns humility by being assigned laundry duty, soap, water, time to think. And then there are the micro-rituals that keep dignity stitched together. A joke before a painful catheter attempt. A rule that no one is mocked for leaks. Ever. A practice of washing each other's backs in the bathhouse with brisk professional tenderness that says, "You're still a person in here." News travels faster than edicts. Who to trust with savings. Who to avoid after dark. Which guard grew hands he didn't have last month. When the net holds, it's thin but real. A bed when you're sick. A bowl when you're broke. A voice to answer the steward when you can't stand. When it tears, purges, famines, a new regime that decides your house is impure, the community scatters like birds, then reforms in another eve. You learn to carry the brotherhood in your habits, always share the first pinch of salt, always leave a clean cloth folded at the end of the bed for the next man, always teach the new ones the boring tricks that kept you here. Here's the quiet truth. These communities don't fix the system. They buffer the impact. They turn survival from a solo event into a team sport where the prize is another ordinary day. You go to sleep to the sound of someone else breathing in the next bed and think, not I am saved, but I am seen. And in a life built on being present but unseen, that's not small. It's the closest thing to home. It doesn't end with a speech. It ends on an ordinary day that decided to show its teeth. You're late leaving the bath because a messenger dragged you 2 corridors the wrong way. You dress too fast, belt a notch tighter than wisdom, and hurry. A sandal rubs your heel, a tiny hot sting you file for later. Later doesn't come. That nick is nothing until it isn't. By night it's a bead of pus, a ring of red, a throb you misname annoying, because the palace taught you to rename pain until it stops asking for attention. You wash it with warm water, salt, a dab of oil. You sleep in slices. Morning brings fever's handshake. Polite at first. You still show up. Absence is louder than a cough. Duty runs you like a horse. You swap cloths, you sip salted broth. You hold a tray with hands that hum. Heat deepens. The heel swells. Red turns cherry, then bruised plum. You ask the elder in your dorm for a glance. He frowns, nods at your bucket, tells you to soak. You do, for 10 minutes you don't have. A boy knocks. A steward wants a list. You stand. The wound smiles and opens. Infection has patience. It climbs by inches, heel to ankle, ankle to calf, a ladder you don't remember building. Chills grip you between hot flushes. The corridor tilts when you turn. You sit, pretend you were checking a scuff on the floor. You tell yourself you'll go to the healer after one more delivery. One more always breeds another. By twilight, you've said one more 10 times. At home, the dawn breathes different around fever. A blanket appears. A bowl arrives. Someone salts the water to the right sting. You can't taste the broth. The elder feels your forehead, murmurs the word you hate, rest. You swallow 3 mouthfuls of pride and lie down. The night cracks into shards, sweat, shiver, piss, pain, the healer coal pressed into flesh. You dream of bells underwater. If the gods are kind, the fever breaks on the 3rd day. You wake wrung out, hungry, annoyed, alive. The wound is ugly but smaller. You limp for a week, then file the scar under lessons you'll actually remember. If the gods are busy, it goes the other way. Heat runs higher, words tangle at the edges, thirst escalates while your bladder sulks. You drift and surface to faces bending over you, the elder's voice blunt and gentle. Stay. Another exit opens through stones. You feel it in the kidneys first, dull ache long ignored. Then the knife arrives. Pain radiates like lightning trapped under skin. You crouch over a basin, breath staccato. World shrinking to a point of light you chase because that point might be relief. Sometimes you pass it. Ping, a pebble, a gasp, a sob you turn into a cough. Sometimes it doesn't pass. Something ruptures inside a place you can't name, and fever comes on a horse you can't outrun. It's fast. People tidy your room while you're still trying to sit up. Politics has its own endings. A patron falls. You carry the seal that carried his voice, and suddenly it weighs like a rock in your pocket. Doors that opened yesterday pretend you've always been a stranger. An inquiry starts with questions phrased as kindness. It ends with facts phrased as decisions. Theft, sedition, witchcraft. Pick a script. You're escorted to a courtyard that smells of lime and finality, or to a gate that leads to a road with no inns. Exile if they're bored, execution if they need to teach the room a lesson. Either way, the building that owned you spits you out like a bone. There's a quieter path too, the one few get but many plan for out of sheer stubbornness. You reach old age, bones thin, steps shorten. Your hands still work, slower, surer. You live in the charitable house you bought with years, abide rules you could recite in your sleep. Afternoons fill with warmth in patches, stories told twice, careful walks that look like prayers. You teach younger ones not to scratch. You keep a small box under the bed with 3 important things: a list of who gets your blankets, a letter that says someone's name, and a scrap of cloth that smells like the kitchen where you were last happy. Final care is simple: warm cloth, changed often. Broth in a cup you can lift. Someone's hand under the bowl so you don't spill and feel like a failure. They raise your head the way you raised theirs back when your hands didn't shake. You breathe steam. You count breaths. You doze. You wake to a joke that lands even now. Dignity, for once, doesn't require performance. Memory becomes housekeeping for the living. Letters burned because letters are dangerous. Seals reassigned to new hands that will call them theirs. Your name becomes shorthand in a corridor. Don't end up like... followed by silence. You become a caution, a speed bump in someone else's ambition. The boys you advised will still use your tricks and pretend they invented them. That's fine. Tricks kept you alive long enough to pass them on. How does it end? Quietly, usually. A breath that doesn't return. A fever that doesn't break. A door that doesn't open. The bed the house promised bears your weight until it doesn't have to. Someone washes your body with brisk, gentle practicality. The bowl is emptied. The sheet is drawn. The room returns to being a room. And outside the bell rings. The palace inhales. Somewhere, a boy tightens his belt 1 notch too far and tells himself he'll fix the blister later. Let's be clear. This wasn't an accident. You exist because power did the math and liked the answer. Start with succession. Inside the perimeter, bedchambers, nurseries, private halls. The only risk rulers truly fear is someone's bloodline competing with theirs. So the system neutralizes paternity right at the door. You can cross thresholds others can't without creating heirs. That makes you the perfect key. You open rooms without opening dynasties. That's the myth of purity dressed as policy. Court stories call you safe, trustworthy, pure. But purity here is a calculation about inheritance, not morality. The thing most people miss is who benefits, not you, the ruler. The wives and concubines are guarded by bodies considered incapable of writing new branches onto the family tree. It's bookkeeping with knives. Now the outsider-insider paradox. Power wants loyalty that can't escape. You're barred from founding a house. You can't marry up and turn influence into lineage. Therefore your future is stapled to the throne's present. And palace literati tell themselves that makes you loyal. It often does. Loyal like a sailor to the ship he's nailed to. You rise with the tide. You drown when the hull tears. From the ruler's angle, that's efficient. Here's the bureaucratic glue. Courts are built on boundaries. Public's inner, holy, profane, masculine, feminine, civil, military. Most people belong to one side. You cross them. That's your function. You carry sealed orders from the outer chancery to the inner rooms. You move from treasury ledgers to nursery doors without contaminating bloodlines, so they say, while maintaining the fiction that these worlds don't touch. You're the hinge that connects compartments designed to pretend they're separate. And remember what we said about hinges. They get replaced when they squeak. Economics keeps the wheel greased. There's profit in every step. Brokers and raiders supply bodies. Surgeons and handlers are paid. Placement earns fees. Salaries recycle into fines, uniforms, voluntary contributions. Punishments confiscate savings and houses. Even your burial can be an invoice. An entire ecosystem grows around keeping you necessary and slightly indebted. The reason this works is misaligned incentives. As long as someone makes money at your expense, reform is a rumour that needs a famine to stand up. Religious and cultural rationalizations do the softening. Texts get mined for metaphors about devotion and self-denial. Purity narratives bless your presence in spaces others mustn't enter. Trust stories bloom. The faithful servant, the incorruptible steward, the voice that whispers truth to power because he has no sons to bribe. It's tidy. It's also theatre. Trust is cheaper when created by removing options rather than building character. Before we continue, you need to see how the parts reinforce each other. Succession anxiety creates demand. The insider-outsider logic supplies a workforce with nowhere else to anchor. Bureaucracy discovers a human conduit that can cross zones without scandal. Money crowds in to monetize the pipeline. Culture paints the whole machine in gold leaf so everyone can sleep at night. That's not conspiracy. That's compound interest in cruelty. You ask, why not replace eunuchs with rules? Locks, edicts, guards sworn to celibacy. They tried versions. Locks break. Edicts bend. Guards have families. Your altered body is a living policy. It enforces itself. No signature required. Rulers love policies that don't need reminders. Administrators love bodies that do two jobs at once, workforce and warning. And about the rare successes, chiefs with seals, directors who wrote history's margins, those aren't glitches, they're features. The system needs visible rewards to recruit compliance and mask attrition. Let one of you rise so thousands stay docile. Parade silk stipends so boys ignore the fever stories. Keep the ladder narrow but present. Hope is cheaper than raises. This machine also solves a problem nobody names, plausible deniability. If a scandal touches the inner court, blame flows downhill and sticks to you. You're intimate to everything and belonging to nothing. That makes you the perfect drain for outrage. Systems survive by finding culprits who can't retaliate. You were designed not to. So why did eunuchs persist? Because your existence was the cleanest compromise between paranoia and access, between governance and gossip, between sacred privacy and the messy reality of running a palace. You made impossible rooms talk to each other without writing new claimants into the bloodline. You did it quietly, reliably, and at a personal cost the ledgers never had to show. The truth is, rulers didn't keep you because it was just, they kept you because it worked. So before your brain clings to the one glittering story, yes, a few of you climbed. Chiefs with seals, gatekeepers who could whisper an emperor awake or let a prince sleep through danger. Admirals in some periods, cultural patrons in others. Their names survived. Most of yours didn't. Don't let the archives gaslight you. Here's the thing most people miss. Those exceptions survived by managing terror like a ledger, balanced daily, never closed. Rising meant better rooms and sharper cliffs. Every silk stipend came with a rumour stapled to it. Every favour earned an enemy who read your breath like treason. You slept in softer beds and woke to harder questions. Their timing had to be ruthless. They appeared when factions were tied and needed a hinge. They vanished from sight when knives came out. They didn't win by outmuscling rivals. They won by being slightly less convenient to kill this week. The method isn't mysterious. It's exhausting. You cultivate 3 patrons who hate each other, so none can erase you without the others noticing. You keep copies of copies and never keep them in the same building. You send coal to a guard's mother because winter makes loyal sons. But don't mistake proximity for privilege. It's leased space. The key is on loan from a mood. The seal warms to your skin today and burns you tomorrow. You carry authority the way a servant carries a candle near silk, steady hand, eyes on the draft, knowing one sneeze ends a dynasty's patience and your life first. Another quiet truth. The stories that survive are spectacular by design. Chroniclers wrote the fireworks, not the cold. They wrote about the chief who routed a plot with a hallway whisper, not the 100 men who kept ledgers so clean nobody noticed how essential they were. Survival doesn't make noise. It makes tea and counts spoons. And sometimes the lucky ones died uglier. When regimes flipped, a famous name made a neater headline. Confiscations hit hardest where there was most to take. A small man loses blankets. A great man loses houses and head in the same afternoon. The fall matches the climb. So yes, the ladder exists. Yes, a few reached balconies and waved. But the rule, not the exception, is service in the draft. Maintenance as religion. Dignity guarded by routine. Don't let one bright lamp blind you to the room. Let's tighten the knots you've tied. The entry price wasn't a right, it was a gamble with blood, fever and odds that changed by empire and decade. You entered because someone needed bodies that wouldn't complicate bloodlines. You woke from the cut into a new category, not a promotion. The job was intimacy without belonging. You carried towels into rooms where prayers whispered and politics screamed, and you left your name at the threshold. You were trusted like furniture, valued for silence, replaced when scratched. Responsibility climbed your back, safety didn't climb with it. Your body rewired itself without asking. Hormones shifted fat and mood. Cold found you faster. Rashes wrote their own schedules. Healing turned into logistics. Air, cloth, warmth, water. Nothing dramatic, just relentless. Desire didn't die. It detoured. You learned to sit with it, to be human in a building that pretended you were a tool. The medical grind was daily arithmetic. Strictures narrowed flow. Stones auditioned for villainy. Infections patrolled the borders. You learned sitz baths, salted sips, soft refusals to bad advice, the art of changing cloth like a card trick. You planned liquid like a clerk plans columns. The palace didn't pause. You survived between bells. The myths cracked under inspection. Sexless didn't mean safe. It meant the danger wore different uniforms and spoke in euphemisms. Power wasn't common. It was concentrated in a few who rented it from volatile patrons and returned it with interest. Wealth showed up as a target. Freedom came on paper that needed witnesses to breathe. Across empires, the wallpaper changed. Byzantium gave you incense and bureaucracy. Islamic courts gave you harem access and stratified roles. Ming and Qing China gave you a labyrinth of departments and punishments that read like manuals. The common thread held: closeness to the centre, distance from belonging. The ladder worked like a slow pulley. You climbed with logistics, handwriting, mood reading. You spread credit by safety, kept copies of copies, said yes in public, and no by being helpfully unavailable. Each upgrade added enemies. You slept lighter with better blankets. Middle age turned pain into a timetable. Morning negotiations with bladder and joints. Midday swelling. Evening maintenance and warm water. Night watches broken by fear and habit. Coping looked small. Ginger, walks, breath in fours. But it kept you upright. Community mattered. Dorms became brotherhoods. Elders carried quiet knowledge. Charity houses offered thin nets that held more often than they tore. You washed each other's backs and refused to weaponize leaks. Mutual aid lived in coins under bowls and coal delivered to the right door. Endings taught the same lesson by different routes. A blister ignored, a stone that didn't pass, a patron who fell, or the thin mercy of old age with a clean sheet and a steady hand under your cup. Memory didn't keep your letters, it kept your techniques. And the system's logic. It persisted because it solved problems for power, succession paranoia, boundary management, bureaucratic throughput, and a profitable economy of bodies. Culture lacquered it with purity myths so everyone could sleep. You didn't persist because it was humane. You persisted because the machine ran better when you ran inside it. If you remember nothing else, remember this. You turned unbearable into routine, and routine is what kept you alive. Here's the takeaway. Eunuchs existed because power wanted keys that didn't make heirs, and your life became maintenance, service, and quiet pain disguised as reliability. If this pulled you in, subscribe and queue up the deep dive while you probably wouldn't make it as a shinobi. Comment where you're listening from and what time it is. Now dim the lights and keep going.